This episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Become a patron today at patreon.com/into the portal. There are many explorers who over time have fallen between the cracks of history. Those who blend into a particular narrative that may not fit the status quo of our established historical past. These explorers turn up in the pages of great mythologies and tales of adventure and sacrifice, harrowing missions reaching for a new world. 512 AD, somewhere in the North Atlantic. Freezing cold waves crashed over the deck of the Curragh as the men inside huddled and hung on for their lives. The sea thrashed violently, yet their small and sturdy vessel was holding strong, staying upright through the massive swells. It was a journey prompted by faith, and a mission to discover a paradise and spread the word of their Savior. Saint Brendan was embarking on a voyage that none had thought possible. When the winds receded into calm waters, Saint Brendan and the monks took stock of their surroundings, as they witnessed things thought only to reside in one's imagination. Towering crystal pillars afloat in the waters of the vast expanse that lay before them. When they finally reached land and navigated further, the monks would write of other encounters. Great giants who spat fireballs towards their ship as they approached, and massive sheep greater in size than an oxen scaling the hillside. After 7 long years, the monks would indeed reach their paradise, and after several years more, their tales would once again return to the shores of the British Isles. But did the journey of St. Brendan actually take place? Or perhaps this legend was born out of an even earlier epic quest? Join us on Into the Portal for a new adventure, as we investigate the legends and evidence of lesser-known travelers, ancient Irish and Celtic explorers.
Hello, and welcome back into the portal. I'm Amber Ray.
And I'm Andrew McKay.
And we're back.
Here we are.
Part 2
of our... It's a combination of a pre-Columbian exploration series and just straight up ancient explorers as well, kind of.
Exactly.
Yeah, we're really excited to get into this one because we think we're kind of going different directions that people wouldn't expect necessarily with this kind of subject area, and that's why we wanted to do the ancient Chinese explorers for the part 1. Mm-hmm. But I feel like we probably missed a couple of things too because these subjects are so detailed. So we've actually talked about maybe doing a kind of a bonus ep where we can follow up on some of these things.
Perhaps, yeah, because we've had some great feedback from some of our listeners, and
yeah,
I think maybe to do it more justice,
definitely.
Little bonus that might be needed.
Yeah, there's some other evidence to follow.
I think we should get through this second part and then kind of like tally up all the different things that we would want to just wrap up and make sure there's no loose ends involved.
We can't have loose ends. But before we get started today, we do have a new review, and I wanted to read it out. So this is from iTunes, and it's from the Australian iTunes.
Sweet.
So this is from Epion 1976. So it's a 5-star review. It reads, I have listened to other podcasts in the same field and found them to be a bit dull. Great subject matter, but boring to listen to. Into the Portal is totally the opposite. I enjoy listening to them. They do good research and awesome subjects, especially the ones on cryptids and lost civilizations, and being an Aussie, I loved the Bunyip episode and never actually thought of it as a cryptid. I look forward to every episode and can't wait until the next. Thanks, guys.
Cool.
So thank you so much, man. That Epion 1976, that is awesome. Thank you so much.
Really
and keep those reviews coming in, everybody. It really helps the show more than you know. So iTunes, Apple Podcast app, Facebook, wherever you can leave a review, makes our day.
It really does, yeah. That's so sweet of him. Yeah. The Bunyip, hey, that's interesting how he's like talking about how he never really considered that to be a cryptid. Mm-hmm. I wonder what he did.
I suppose it could be a her as well. I don't know why I just think it's
a her.
I don't know why, but
I guess maybe I get that, like, because I never really thought of Ogopogo as a cryptid growing up.
Yeah.
Like, I just thought of it as, like, you know, just that friendly guy in the lake kind of thing.
When it's around where you live, it's one of those things, right? Like, it doesn't...
It's not like the Mothman.
No, it's not super obscure.
Spooky thing or whatever.
Totally.
But yeah, that's awesome, though. Thank you. All right. So today... we're going west.
We are.
Sort of.
Kind of.
Well, we're sort of west because we're talking about European cultures.
Yeah.
And they're looking to the west. So in that sense, we're going west.
Yeah. And obviously, like, with Western cultures, I guess, like...
Yeah.
Eastern.
Western European.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So we've got 2 legends for you folks today. Mm-hmm. The first, I love the header we put for this one. That was all you, Andrew. And I was like, whoa, like, I feel like that's...
Why did I put that like that? I don't know why. I titled the beginning of our document here, The Irish Connection.
I love it. Sweet. It's like the French Connection. It's like, it sounds like totally badass.
Yeah. It reminded me of Pink Panther.
Yeah. Well, yeah, French Connection, the mob, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Anyway, even though that has nothing to do with what we were going to talk about today.
We just love Pink Panther. Yeah. Not the Steve Martin ones.
No, the originals with, oh my gosh, Peter Sellers.
Yes. Yeah. The Sellers.
Yeah. Great movies. So yeah, we are kind of, there's 2 legends we're working with, and I guess, here, why don't you introduce this one, Amber? The first one.
Yes. Okay. Because this is definitely a broader legend that was adopted in many different European subcultures across the continent and in the British Isles, that type of thing. And there's so many different versions of it that it's basically impossible to track down the original. But there's 2 main versions of it, right? And you're going to get into that more so, but. Right. Basically, this originates from what is called an imram. So it's kind of like a class of, I don't want to call it folk tales or fairy tales, but kind of like that, where it's like old Irish tales, and it basically centers around a hero's epic journey to what's called the other world.
Right, okay.
So very cool mythic elements for sure. It was written in a Christian era, so it's written from a Christian perspective, even though there are elements of sort of like Irish pagan mythology in a lot of it, but like, and the things like, okay, so main elements here. Generally, the hero journeys westward. He follows the track of the sun through the sky, and he encounters all sorts of crazy things, dragons, sirens, like, you know, all sorts of like dangers, death, and
monsters,
despair,
and
monsters,
things.
Exactly. And so basically these stories go that only the true hero can traverse these perils and find what is usually referred to as Eden or Elysium or the other world.
Gotcha.
So definitely not confined to just the Irish. It was brought up in Homer's epic tales, in ancient Greece, in Egypt. One that sort of struck me in particular when I was doing some preliminary research was the tale of Osiris, right? Tracking through the sun. Yeah. And then he goes into the Duat, the underworld. And so that's, again, just one version of this sort of...
the journey.
Exactly. The classic quintessential hero's journey.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I get, like, the sun, natural elements had a lot of inspiration in these legends. Basically, like, the other world is almost like the realm of the gods. Like,
right.
I'm picturing, like, you know, like Hercules, that type of thing. Yeah,
it's so cool really how these things cross over culturally, right? I mean, like we just said, this came up in the Osiris Shaft episode, and multiple others as well, and it just kind of cycles through history. But the interesting thing is to kind of look at it and be like, okay, there's these similar archetypes or themes or whatever, but what aspects of them are unique to each kind of category, right? Because we're looking at an Irish legend here and Welsh, and what parts of it could be true. Or what parts of it could be leaning towards true, right? And
you have to wonder, too, like, sure, maybe, there's obviously, like, exactly as I said, these archetypes, these quintessential narratives, and what if, like, there is the reality that sort of coincides and exists in a parallel, and then is sort of adopted, because a lot of this was in oral tradition, it was passed down through bards, it was passed down through, oral storytelling, and so... You have to wonder if, once these people die, like the St. Brennan that we're going to talk about, if he's sort of memorialized through these epic poems and tales, and if they were based on his actual exploits, like how much of it bleeds into myth and how much of it is actual,
how much is
fact.
embellished, and what was it based on. Yeah, exactly.
So
I think it's about time that we introduce this guy then.
Yeah. I think it is.
So that's basically, so like what you just went over, Amber, is like the structure of the legend, right?
Yes.
And how
this is the backdrop.
The backdrop of the legend. And essentially, this is just one story, but it's what became one of the most famous ones. It's kind of more obscure now, which is funny. We were talking about this the other day, right?
Yeah.
And it is the tale of the legendary Saint Brendan. So, but like, we were talking about this earlier, how we wanted to pick stories for ancient explorers and pre-Columbian exchange that people wouldn't necessarily talk about all the time. And people have talked, obviously, ancient Chinese, ancient Irish are definitely, they come up, but they're not like the dominant pre-Columbian theories that people talk about.
Definitely what I think of is more so like the Norse side of things, the Vikings. Like that feels like the most proven.
Yeah, definitely. Like up north. And then I feel like when I'm researching anyway, the dominant one that comes up for more South American stuff is just looking at like Polynesian or whatever travelers, island hoppers basically, with their big dugout canoes and stuff like that, but not necessarily ancient Egyptians or Romans or anything like that. But we found the legend of Brendan to just be absolutely fascinating. And this is essentially how it goes. So the legend goes that according to a 1,500-year-old Irish tale that we were just talking about, what is it called? The Imram?
Yeah, an Imram. It's just like it's a traditional, like, folk telling thing. I totally butchered that. Yeah, but just like an epic story format. So this is just one, just to be clear as well, this is just one version of the story, but this is probably the most dominant version. It's around a 1,500-year-old Irish tale. Saint Brendan embarked on one of the most epic journeys in Irish history, probably in world history, if it actually happened. It was in the winter of his 93-year-old life, according to this one version of the story. So, very, very old man. Yeah. Embarking on quite an epic journey. But of course he has God on his side because he's Saint Brendan, right? True. No, I mean really, right? They were. You said that. Well, I'm sure that's what he was thinking, right? Oh my God. So the crew size was varied between 18 to 120 in some accounts. I've actually seen up to 156.
Okay.
In others,
So we don't actually know the size of his boat, but essentially the story goes that he embarked on a journey that was just. Oh wait, where did he leave from? So he embarked the rugged. Well,
he had a almost like a spiritual experience before he left, right? And he basically sat up. The story I heard was that he was up on this like mountaintop on this like rugged peninsula overlooking the Western Sea towards like basically facing towards North America.
And he was just meditating.
Exactly. And then that's when he kind of got in his head that he needed to embark on this epic journey to Eden or Elysium or whatever.
A quest for the Garden of Eden or something like that. The story went that it was a 7-year journey to get to where he was going.
That's so
he would have been 100 years old. Not like the monks,
eh? Remember that like 41-year-old journey?
Oh, yeah.
It took them 41 years to traverse the oceans. And well, they went inland too, I believe, in that.
Yeah, they hoofed it like...
We're talking about the Chinese people.
Yeah. They like hoofed it into Colorado and stuff. Like they
scaled all the way up to Saskatchewan in some cases.
Apparently.
But anyway, sorry, we're getting left out.
But on this journey, like we said before, I mean, he encountered things that are kind of unbelievable. But some aspects of the journey are believable.
Ooh, and we watched that really cool. It was like a 15-minute movie with no talking.
It was strange.
It was so creepy and cool, and I would recommend it to anyone who wants a visual interpretation of what this voyage could have looked like, because it's very interesting and very well done.
We'll post a link for it.
Yeah,
for sure.
Totally. It'll be in our resources. Yeah, I would highly recommend checking it out.
It's like not claymation, but it's like paper. It's kind of like almost like South Park style, where it's all cut apart, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, but it's really cool.
Really well done.
So, but they said on this journey that Brendan encountered towering crystal pillars afloat in the oceans.
Whoa. Is that what if that's icebergs?
Oh, right? I mean, these are exactly right. Like, there's lots of metaphors in here.
Okay.
For sure, right? Because this is, oh, sorry. And just to be clear, this was around 400 CE.
Oh, right.
In and around.
I should probably date
Okay,
that.
we probably should have mentioned that. I'm saying a 1,500-year-old Irish tale, but like it was in and around 400 CE, so significantly before Christopher Columbus, like over 1,000 years before Christopher Columbus, right?
Well, some people date it a little bit later. Like this one, there was this one article from History.com that said that Brendan died at around 577 AD.
Okay, so that's a little bit. That's
still like 1,500 years, really.
It's still way before Columbus, right?
Ish. No, it's like 1,000 years.
And it's well before the Norse as well.
Or no, it's 1,500. Sorry. My math is off.
Sitting here trying to do math.
Oh, dear.
It's changing into a different podcast.
Math fails.
Math fails. Yeah, there's no shortage of that in this house. He also spotted on this journey off on the shores sheep the size of oxen.
What?
Okay, so like, but what could that be? I mean, they're used to seeing sheep.
Ooh, what if it's buffalo?
What if it is?
Yeah.
Or something else. Giants who pelted the ship with fireballs that smelled like rotten eggs. So what does that sound like? That sounds like sulfur.
Yeah.
And potentially a volcano.
Oh.
I don't know.
That makes sense.
Right?
Yeah. Giants, like mountains.
Right? I mean, it's just turn a phrase, right?
Yeah.
And talking birds singing like,
Psalms or
yeah.
palms. Psalms or palms? That's
Psalms,
like
palms.
I think it's Psalms. It's like the guy from the Bible.
The guy.
The Book of Psalms.
That guy.
The Book of Psalms or
that
Palms or something. I don't know. It's P.S. And I used to know that kind of stuff.
P.S.
I
we
used
don't
to
know
go to Sunday school
about
and
that.
yeah, just P.S. Forgot it all. Sorry.
So he basically, the story got cycled back to Ireland, right? Like they went on this 7-year journey. They encountered these things, Brendan and his crew, and somebody made it back.
Well, Brendan made it back. He was highly revered. That people flocked him. It was like a pilgrimage.
Right. That's this one story, the original one. He made it back. He would have been 107.
No, okay. This is where it gets confusing because in some legends. Because it's so convoluted. In some legends, there's the idea that there was an older Brendan and a younger Brendan.
Right.
And that the younger Brendan was actually the one that was sent.
Yeah.
And then he came back and then...
Like he was inspired by the older Brendan and then sent on this missionary journey.
It was almost as if the way that Okay. So this is where we're getting into another version of the legend, which comes from this book that I kind of was peeking into. It was called The Idea of the West, and it's by this guy called Baritz. And this is a Celtic version. And so basically this is weird. Okay, so this is basically how it goes. It says here that Brendan's motive in sailing was appropriately fantastic. A mysterious flower from the promised land appeared to the 12 apostles of Ireland, all of whom wanted to set out in search of that land. The lot fell to the aged Brendan of Birr, the oldest saint of Ireland. It was decided that Brendan the younger should go, whereupon he and 158 companions set out in one boat. So that's where you get the 158 companions.
Right.
And that's where you get the switch out of the Brendan. So it's more plausible that obviously a younger person would be sent out. That's interesting, though, hey, because it's like the promised land. So again, we get those references to Eden, to Elysium, to all this, that sort of far-off other world.
Right.
So that's where this sort of biblical element is still, and that's why they kind of, they say like it's steeped in Christianity and Christian mythology and all that kind of stuff.
Totally.
That, again, yeah.
And the thing is like for me, when I think about that, when I try to put myself when I close my eyes and try to put myself as a fly on the wall in that time period, being like, is there something across this great sea, right? Mm-hmm. It's one thing to just sit there and speculate about it. It's another thing to have heard like another ancient story and almost there is some knowledge that there is something there. It's not just about going, hopefully we hit something. Yeah. It's about, they know. It's an intuitive thing.
Exactly.
That they know that there's an Eden out there.
That to me is like, I love that because it's fantasy and reality. Obviously that's the basis of legends and myths and all that. Yeah. But just the idea, that would have been so cool to live in a time where it's like we didn't know everything about the world, and like there was a place far off that you just You look to the sea. I remember, this is a really cheesy reference, but I used to love watching Tristan and Isolde. And there was always that sort of, at the beginning, she's always looking out to the sea and always wondering what's across. Of course, she wasn't looking west, she was looking to the British Isles, but...
Yeah.
And then likewise, the people in the British were looking towards the... Anyways,
it's just the thing. It's like, we find this to be so profound. Like, it's almost sometimes hard to convey. Because it's like, you have to be really into history, and we're trying to crank the history into you guys because really, like, think about that. Imagine being on the receiving end too. Imagine being indigenous populations in North America, and there's stories about the reverse, right? There's stories about the reverse, about indigenous peoples from North America actually going the other way and crossing the ocean the other way. Maybe we'll do an episode on that.
Cool. I've never actually heard of that.
But just the idea that you would picture showing up on the shore of a place that you never even knew it existed, and you come across plants you've never seen, animals you've never seen, and humans you've never seen. Cultures. That don't look like you. You don't know what they're saying. Yeah. It's just mind-blowing to me. It
really is.
It's like so cool.
And it's interesting to think, just as a modern-day example, the people on North Sentinel Island, and that the People with No Fire episode we covered, that's like the modern-day version of that, really.
Pretty much.
They're just like, they're living on their tiny little isolated piece of land.
Yeah.
And everything else is just alien.
Right.
It's a completely different world.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I love that, though.
Yeah.
And that's why we're doing this episode.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's definitely our inspiration. That's... Oh. So in this... Sorry, to continue on with this Celtic version now of the legend... Oh my gosh. Yeah, so Baritz, he really goes into this idea that there is a lot of convolution around this legend. How it was told basically in every European tongue.
It was so there popular.
Was in every exactly. It became one of the most widespread tales of adventure in Western Christendom.
Crazy.
And he actually notes that there was a remarkably similar counterpart even in Japan. So that's how far it went. Like, that's crazy to me.
Yeah.
And obviously he's very fluid in how he talks about these legends in the actual book, this Baritz guy. But it all makes sense. It all has these common themes. It all has this, exploration element to it, and the central figure.
So the original version was written in Latin, I believe, right? And then it was translated into a bunch of different European languages.
Was it? Yeah. Actually, that makes sense, because the written version didn't come around until centuries later.
But
exactly.
it was
like 13th or 14th century, I think.
Something like that.
Yeah. So anyways, this Baritz guy, he definitely goes on to describe how there was 27 other versions that he came up with of how Saint Brendan wanted to, like, how he set about this journey, what he wanted. Basically, a lot of the themes were that he was looking for peace. He wanted to remove himself from the envy and jealousies of man. A place where, this is a quote from the text, over the wave voice of the strong-maned sea, and over the storm of the green-sided waves, and over the mouth of the marvelous, awful, bitter ocean. ... Brendan traveled. One of the most interesting parts of this Celtic version was the idea that, so it was a 7-year journey, so obviously there were 7 Easters, so to speak, and it says here that whenever the dawn of Easter showed, this is a quote, some huge sea creature would surface so that the saint and his crew could worship on its back. End quote. That was from page
and they show that in that little animated short that we were talking about. They show it all.
It's a really cool little video.
It is cool. It's strange but cool.
Yeah.
You gotta wonder, I mean, you can't just worship in the boat.
That was my question too. I was like, why would you get on some crazy sea creature? Like, is this a whale we're talking about that's just like surfacing and then you're climbing on his back and then he's just like cool with that? Like, it's like Moby Dick but nice.
It's like taming the sea. Taming the sea. I mean, well,
like you said, Andrew, God was on their side.
Clearly.
I
mean, you got whales surfacing, and you can just hang out on their back, have a campfire, cup of coffee, whatever, get back in the boat, on your way.
That's what I loved about that video, too, is how when they end up finding the promised land, the new world or whatever, they get off the boat, and they kind of walk around for a bit, and then they just get back on the boat.
Yeah, and they're just like,
yep. It's like, okay, sweet, we saw it. All right, let's go. So funny.
It is really cool, though, because it's like it's all in riddles, essentially, right? And that's what these myths and legends are. And the further back you go, the more kind of convoluted they get, because we're dealing with a Latin translation into Old English, then Old English translation into 27 European languages, and then from those 27 European languages in modern day English.
And even from that, right, it wouldn't have been as if there was one oral legend that was recorded, and then that was the
it would have been
basis. I don't even know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, the basis.
The basis of all of those. It would have been multiple oral traditions, not simultaneously, but over time recorded and all that, and then disseminated, and then all this stuff. So, again, lots of different amalgamations, embellishments, all this kind of stuff. But
right.
It makes it interesting.
But the heart of the legend has remained the same.
Exactly.
Right.
That he did travel to this new world, discovered all this stuff.
And we will get into the route he possibly took, the boat, all that stuff in just a minute.
Totally. So, I think we should get into more of, like, the history and the origins of this legend. Like, we've already talked about how, like, basically... Oh, it says here 9th century. Sorry, that was a bit earlier than I was thinking. So it was a 9th century Irish monk that finally put this legend to paper. And you're right, it was Latin text.
Right.
It was called Navigatio Sancti Brandani. Navigatio
Sancti Brandani.
The Voyage of Saint Brendan. It says here, this is a quote, the book was among the biggest page turners of the Middle Ages and became so widely known that cartographers began to include paradise recorded as Saint Brendan's Island on maps.
Wow.
That's cool.
Very cool.
Wow.
A page turner for the Middle Ages.
A page turner. I mean, how many people were reading back then?
Not the majority.
Yeah, just the aristocrats.
Yeah.
And all that. I almost said Aristocats.
Great movie.
I used to get that so confused when I was younger. I was like, what?
Great. Yeah.
It's just one letter, man. One letter difference.
Yeah.
But as for this actual... You came up with some history behind this legend, hey? Like, there was...
Yeah, so I mean, just a little bit more on Brendan. Like, and we said we're not really sure because there's legends talking about how him 93 years old setting out. Then there's Brendan the Younger, which makes a lot more sense. Like, if there was this Saint Brendan, he maybe had a mentor or
an elder.
Or he was the elder or whatever.
Had, like,
he had a prodigy, right?
Yeah.
Brendan the Younger sends him along.
We said prodigy at the same time.
Jinx.
Oh my gosh. I'm still gonna talk.
That's fine. So yeah, we don't know which Brendan this is referring to, but we had a date that was Brendan was born in 484 CE.
That makes
supposedly
sense.
in a small place called Tralee in County Kerry in the province of Munster.
Munster.
So this is southwest Ireland.
Like the Munsters?
Yeah, the Munstermobile. He was driving around in it.
Cool.
So he was born... He was born among this tribe called the Altridge, and it was originally centered around Tralee Bay. And his parents were named Finlung and Cara, supposedly. But that's just it though. There's very little secure information about this guy, and we don't really know that much about his life other than this journey, and we don't know the approximate dates of his birth and death. So it's all kind of. It's just one of those things. It's like we're fairly certain he's a real person, but it's kind of an amalgamation of potentially 2 or 3 Brendans.
Huh.
So.
Well, Brendan's a pretty common name.
But it is said that he was well known, though, right? Like we said. So not just for the story, but even before the actual journey itself. So that, like, he was, frequently sailed the high seas and was a sailor. And the early Christians at that time were known for being good seafarers. They had ships, they and we'll get into the details of the boat again, but essentially it was a hide boat using skin, animal skins, right? Super watertight, really well built, and they could make them in a variety of different sizes, and they were super, super durable. They had a very unique way of making them. So anyway, they were seafaring people for sure. That was my little bit of history on that.
The seafaring
And then
people.
again, just for a little bit of perspective, like we mentioned the Norse. So the Norse were in North America around 1000 CE. So,
so this is
400 plus years before Columbus, but this is significantly after potentially the voyage of Brendan.
Right, okay.
So, but I mean, it's still crazy if they were right. So we know that there's a Norse settlement in Newfoundland around 1000 CE.
Yeah.
Right?
Where was that, sorry? In Newfoundland.
Yeah, Newfoundland, like right off the north coast. The reason I wanted to include this as well, though, just to make a mention, the Vikings referred to southern parts of, like, their territory in the north where they had gotten to. Like, so like they had obviously gone over through Greenland, made it to North America and Newfoundland and stuff, and they referred to the territory beneath them that they hadn't traveled to as Irland it Mitkla, or Greater Ireland.
Oh.
And that's from history.com.
Interesting.
So the Norse potentially were aware that their sort of Celtic counterparts had already visited and had already gone further south than they had.
Okay.
So I thought that was an interesting point.
The plot thickens.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like that.
Kind of cool, right?
That is really cool.
Yeah.
And really, when you think about it, sorry, yawning. My coffee hasn't fully taken effect.
Yeah.
If you think about it, though, like, it's really plausible, and like you said, we're gonna get into the actual voyage, the route they would have taken, which was more of an arc. They wouldn't have gone straight across the frickin' Atlantic. They would have been island hopping, going from, exactly that, island to island. Greenland would have been a significant stopover.
Yep.
And then managed to make their way over into, like the east coast of Canada.
Yeah, and I mean, there's actually a guy who recreated this journey. Are we ready to talk about?
Are we talking about the Tim?
Yeah, so pretty
bone?
crazy.
I didn't know where that came from.
It's usually supposed to be the skin bone. That's from X-Files.
That's
It's not actually from X-Files.
I'm so jealous of Ryan
made it.
Sprague from Somewhere in the Skies when he actually got to meet Skinner.
I know.
That's BS, man.
Yeah.
But I wanted to be you in that moment.
Yeah. Shout out to Somewhere in the Skies.
Yeah.
But yeah, this was really cool. So there's this guy named Tim Severin who is basically a researcher. And an author.
Timmy Sevs. Okay.
He became obsessed with the story of St. Brendan and wanted to basically prove that it was possible that this journey could have been made. So he recreated the voyage made by Brendan and the monks that went with him.
That's epic, man.
So he made it. I'm just going to say right now, like, obviously we wouldn't be talking about this if he sank in the middle of the North Atlantic.
Well, we did mention in the Chinese episode, we did mention the fact that they did try and recreate that journey, and they were unsuccessful because they didn't plan for termites. Dumb. Really dumb. But anyways, so this Tim Severin, success. That's really cool.
So he went to recreate the voyage, and in doing so he proved a few different things. He built a traditional ship to see if it could match the same accomplishments. So this ship, like we said before, is basically a hide wrapped wood frame boat, and what they would do is they would take these animal skins. I'm assuming it would basically be like oxen, right?
I would imagine it would be the biggest thing you could get your hands on.
Yeah, the biggest, most durable hide.
Yeah.
In Ireland, I'm trying to think. I mean, there was definitely there's obviously deer and like bucks and stuff. I'm trying to think. It didn't actually say. It didn't say what type of hide it was. Anyway, it's animal skin.
Something
right?
that could be fake. A horse.
A horse.
Just Steve Harvey's face.
Yeah.
That is a Family Feud.
Family Feud inside jokes on Into the Portal.
Sorry, my brain is just all over the map.
It's all good. But yeah, no, they would soak these. They would soak these hides in oil. And so they would basically become super saturated and really durable, and then
it was almost like, what did they call it? It was not pickling them, but it was brining. Brining.
It was similar to that. Yeah, it was a special sort of. It was there was a certain type of wood that was soaked in the water too. It was oak soaked water, oak soaked, something along those lines. But it was basically just a wood frame boat wrapped in skin. And the one thing about that's really great, it's easy to repair. Yeah. While you're out and about, unlike just a straight wood frame boat. If you crash on a rock or something, you're in trouble, right? Yeah. It's harder to patch that type of thing.
Ooh, yeah. So you have to be really good at sewing. Industrial sewer.
Yeah. Okay, so where am I at here? So this was it's called a Kurak.
Did you say the year already for this?
1976.
1976. Yeah. Okay.
So this was the traditional design. It was the Kurak. So he christened the boat Brendan and set off from Ireland to reach North America, and he was successful. And basically, they just island hopped. So they went from Ireland, obviously. Then there's a series of islands that basically makes its way over to Greenland. The problem is that the gap from Greenland to North America is pretty significant. So that's a lot of open ocean. The argument that Tim Severin was basically making is that it's not open ocean travel. They were able to basically...
Okay. So they were using protected areas and pockets.
Yeah, they were more or less...
Coastal pockets.
They were more or less in sight of land at all times.
Oh, well, that's comforting.
right?
Yeah.
Or at least they knew they were between two massive pieces of land.
Yeah.
But basically, they floated their way over, man. They had some issues with their supplies getting soaked in water, so there was a few swells that came over, and because this boat was relatively small, their bags of like food and stuff got kind of messed up.
Oh, no.
So that's something you'd obviously be thinking about for the monks. You know, how would they have survived? Were they hunting seals along the way? Like, were they picking up food as they were traveling along the coast? That's one of the theories, that they could have been hunting and fishing if they stayed tight to the coastline.
Yeah. Especially they did come across, exactly, like wildlife on these islands, sheep, oxen, whatever.
Giant sheep the size of oxen.
Yeah.
Giant sea monsters. Maybe just cut a piece off the top and fry it up. And
the simple thing would be obviously to fish, but yeah.
But essentially, that's one of
really
the best
cool.
pieces of proof, because he showed
This guy's
up.
gnarly, man. Like, I'm just looking at, like, we watched a little bit of his voyage on that YouTube. He's got, like, a bit of a documentary on there, and, like, man, you would not be able to pay me to do that.
No.
And this guy was, like, obsessed. Like, he needed to prove this. So that's cool. That's, like, that is just the regenesis of the explorer, hey, in this day and age. So
and it was funny because people basically criticized him for it, too, saying, like,
of course.
Oh, you made it over, but that doesn't prove anything. It's like, what are you talking about?
That just proves that he just did it.
He floated over in a boat made of wood and animal skins with no modern technology whatsoever, other than the fact that they're being followed just in case so they don't die.
Yeah.
But
well, that's just
pretty
precautions.
impressive. Pretty impressive, honestly.
That is really impressive. Yeah.
He made it from Ireland to Newfoundland in a frickin' skin boat.
And when you think about it too, like, people do epic world voyages in their yachts and stuff, and in their sailboats. Yeah. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not...
No, and they've got their GPSs and all this and that, but it's like...
People are very dismissive of things like that. Like,
ancient peoples.
Exactly.
We think we're so advanced.
Mm-hmm. But really, though, I feel like our advancements have led us to dependency in certain ways. And in that sense, we have been sort of contained within that sort of bubble of thinking.
Well, think about it this way. Here's my way of thinking about it. Okay, we're supposedly living in an era of higher technology. If you threw me a bag of tools and a pile of wood and said build a house, not a chance, not a hope in hell. Right?
Be like a little shanty.
It would just be like FUBAR, just like sleep under the pile of wood, just don't even make anything out of it, just go underneath it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, those skills are gone. These people back in the day, they knew how to do stuff. They had to survive. They knew how to build boats. They knew how to build houses. They knew how to hunt things. In fact, that's another thing too. If I had to get my supper in the woods,
oh my gosh,
I'd be eating bark and I'd last 2.5 hours.
Yeah, I'd be eating sweet grass. I'd be living like a Bigfoot on that one.
Well, yeah, if you could find some sweetgrass, that'd be great.
Yeah, some wild onions.
We're getting a little off topic here. But the point is that people were capable of amazing things.
And we still are. I think we just like to, we like to be naysayers, and we like to hold up these conventions of history, right? And it's funny, there's whole, like, YouTube channels dedicated to, like, you know, like getting rid of Columbus Day, for example, and like, let's rewrite these history books because like, this is not accurate.
No, and there's so much evidence to support. I mean, not just Irish travels, but so many, and people don't want to rewrite history books, right?
No, it's a lot of money.
But this voyage from Tim Severin, basically, he ended up publishing a book and an article in National Geographic about him recreating this, and it basically, you know, ignited the story once again, gave it new life. So
we'll make sure to include that documentary in our resources as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's written quite a few books too, hey, about this kind of stuff. And very interesting character, and honest, he's got a lot of street cred in my books.
Definitely.
Like, who just does that? Like, you can sit there being armchair theorist like we like to do, but this guy actually went and did it.
Yeah.
So
intense.
Good on you. That kind of wraps up our part one, hey, of part one of part two.
Yeah, our story of Brendan.
Of Brendan, yeah. So cool, man. Just like quick recap here. So we've got mythic elements of giant beasts and gaseous balls of fire and whale, well, not whales, but creatures surfacing
Sea
so that
monsters.
Brendan can worship on its back but it all does it sounds fantastical in certain ways, but then if you like you said, it's turn of phrase. A lot of it is stuff that can be interpreted and like we said, it's been proven by the Severin dude. So really neat,
very cool.
So
we're migrating into part
part 2.
You want to introduce who we'll be talking about for the second legend? Well,
this legend comes from the Welsh, and it is the legend of Madoc. Madoc, a Welsh prince who sailed to North America in 1170 AD.
That's such a badass name.
I love it. There's definitely a few other versions of the name, but before we get into that, we are going to take a quick promo break from our friends at Podfix Network. So this is More Gooder Than podcast. So much fun. They love to cover, well, you'll hear in a sec, but they do movies. So really, really cool. And Chris, he is the head of the Podfix Network. We love to be a part of this family.
Yeah, it's awesome.
So much fun. Even just recently we did a collaboration with the Fan Film Boys host, Robert Jenner, and he, it was so much fun. It's this thing we're calling it, what's the name of it again?
My goodness.
Historical Hypocrites, Megalomaniacs, and Madmen.
Yeah.
And so, we're just going to go into sort of lay out the conventional story of the person and then get into the nitty-gritty dirty stuff.
Yeah, so all like politicians and people in history that you know, but you don't know the nitty-gritty stuff.
Exactly. You think you know.
Yeah, so that's a Podfix Presents series, and that'll be released shortly.
Yeah, we'll have more details on that probably next week with our next episode.
Yeah, definitely.
But
take a listen to this promo for More Gooder Than podcast.
What's up, Home Trees? It's me, Chris.
And Corey.
And Donnie.
From the More Gooder Than podcast. For each episode, the three of us pick a thematically similar movie.
Like Dances with Wolves, The Last Samurai, and Avatar.
Or Deep Impact, Armageddon, and Space Cowboys.
And then duke it out until one movie is crowned most goodest.
3 movies into, 1 movie leaves.
Ironically, Thunderdome was not the winner when we tackled the Mad Max trilogy.
You know why, right?
Yeah.
We don't need another hero!
Hey, where can people find More Gooder Than?
You can find us on Twitter at MGT Podcast, our website, mgtpodcast.com, and on Instagram and Facebook at More Gooder Than. We're in iTunes/Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Podbean, Stitcher, Google Play, and any other podcatcher that you can think of. Remember, it's not just good, it's more gooder than.
And we're back. And make sure you go check out some More Gooder Than if you're into some comparative movie competitions.
Definitely.
They really get into it. They're a lot of fun.
It's fun.
But back to the topic of the day. So we're going to dive into another legend. It comes from Wales. And so again, same neck of the woods, but this one is a bit later. So first legend was in about the 4th to 5th century, approximately. This one occurs in the 12th century, so approximately 1170 AD, as I mentioned at the top.
Right.
So, this is a prince. A legendary prince, also described as a quasi-historical figure, according to some.
Okay, so similar to Brendan in a sense.
Exactly,
right.
Bleeding into myth.
Which isn't necessarily saying it's not a real person, it's just there could be multiple people that are amalgamated into one person.
Exactly.
Right, so.
And I'm just going to say right off the bat, there is no evidence to support this at all. Like, no physical remains of settlements, the only remote piece of evidence that supports that he landed in North America is the fact of these supposedly Welsh-speaking Native Americans who were found, and I'm not sure where these Native North Americans were. I would assume it's somewhere in, like, the Mississippi area, but we're going to get into that because there are a lot of theorized places where this Welsh prince would have landed. Okay, so again, this is going to be a bit muddy as it did originate through oral traditions, through the tellings of bards, all that type of stuff again.
Yeah.
and wasn't recorded until the 15th century. But anyways, yeah, the story goes that Madoc was one of many, so this is like 19 sons and counting, of a really real king called Owain Gwynedd? I don't even know.
Those old English words and weird sounding.
Gwynedd. Sure.
Owain Gwynedd.
Owain Gwynedd. And then at the time of Owain's death, there was a bloody dispute that broke out amongst his inheritors because at that time, in the Welsh tradition, it was divided. The kingdom was divided amongst all living...
relatives.
Well, not relatives, all
kids.
Offspring.
Yeah.
And it didn't even matter if they were legitimate or not. So if it was out of wedlock, it didn't
Crazy.
matter. So yeah, 19 siblings. Yeah, you're going to get some fratricide.
Definitely.
And that was exactly what happened. And so Madoc supposedly was kind of not really into that. And he set his sights on the sea. And one of the earliest references to Madoc's legend was in this Welsh poetic form called Cyweed.
Yeah.
Cyweed. Cywydd. And this was by a Welsh poet in the 15th century. His name was Moradud ap Rhys. And Andrew, I'm just going to pass this off to you for a little excerpt from the poem.
Small excerpt from the poem.
A little dramatic reading.
Yeah.
Give it your best.
Splendid Madog of Owain Gwynedd's line, he desired not land or worldly wealth, but the sea. That's it.
So he was longer.
That's it. That's all he had there.
Basically, yeah. So he did not want to rule. He did not want his father's wealth.
Right.
He didn't want any of it. He just wanted to go explore. And he was tired of probably assassination attempts, I would imagine.
Yeah, well, you'd
things
think.
like that. And so, yeah, very similar to Brendan, hey, where he was disheartened with his sort of the way the things be.
Right.
I English really well.
I is English good.
Yeah. Oh dear. Anyways, yeah, so he basically just set his sights on a whole new world. And he was probably inspired by, I would imagine, the stories of St. Brendan's travels, of just this idea that there is an Elysium or an Eden out there in the West, and that all you need to do is go find it.
Definitely. I mean, I guess you could kind of lean on that as a possible, I mean, it's not proof in and of itself, obviously, but just the idea that, yeah, this guy was around much later than Brendan. That story would have been circulated widely. And real people were not only, I mean, he would have been literate, obviously, right? If he was the son of a, wealthy whoever.
Yeah.
He would have read it and he would have been inspired
or at least
by it.
heard it,
Yeah, or heard it or whatever. Yeah, it would have been passed through. It's based on something, right? So it's like people are going to want to adventure because they're hearing a real... The story might not be real, but it's there. It's a real... It's being told.
The allure.
Yeah.
The carrot on the stick.
So who wouldn't want to venture into the sea if you're getting potentially assassinated or just having a crappy time?
Right? So, again, like that poem that you read, that's like one of the earliest references, and that did come about in the 1400s, about 1450, supposedly, or somewhere in and around there.
Okay.
There was another publication by a guy named David Powell, and this came about in 1584. It was called the Histoire de Cambria, or of Cambria.
Okay.
And yeah, it described how Madoc set sail from this place called Leandrio and rose on the sea. I don't even know. I feel like this guy was somewhat French.
Yeah, some of the spelling in this is just a little bit obscure.
Anyways, that reminds me of the French. But anyways, yeah, so he basically set his sights on exploring the Western Ocean, and he had a number of ships. So it's not like St. Brendan where he just had this one ship.
Right, and we don't even know the size of it.
Exactly. And we don't know what the size of the crew was. Actually, no, we do. It says here, this is just a Wikipedia reference, mind you. It says they discovered a distant and abundant land in 1170 where about 100 men, women, and children disembarked to form a colony.
Oh, okay.
Interesting. And, okay, so this is where we're getting into a bit of where the heck they could have possibly landed.
Right.
And it kind of goes all over the map.
Yeah.
So a lot of people think, well, originally it was thought that he landed in Mexico. A lot of people suggest otherwise, and this is just a laundry list of places where he could have possibly landed.
Let's just ramble
off. Mobile, Alabama, Florida, Newfoundland, Newport, Rhode Island, Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, Virginia, points of the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean, including, and the mouth of the Mississippi River, and Yucatan, and Panama, and the Isthmus of
And the West Indies.
How do you know how to say that? Tehuantepec? Tehuantepec.
Yeah.
And then, the Bahamas and the West Indies and the mouth of the Amazon River. So, tons of different places. But, like we said, there's not any evidence to back this up. It's just the loose sort of folklore references. And again, like the allusions. Like, we only had one little tiny line of one of those sort of tales or poems or whatever. But, again, I would imagine they get into all sorts of fantastical details.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get... I mean, I've got a lot to say on this, but I'm going to save it for the theories and ideas at the end.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because...
You're just going to...
I think the fact that there's a million different potential places isn't necessarily a disqualifier for the story.
Well...
But, anyway.
Yeah.
So, let's continue on.
Okay. Well, there we go. Just a little tidbit there.
There you go.
But the thing is, with this legend... The interesting side of it comes about in the first wave of colonization of the New World. So post-Columbus, and basically in the time of the Elizabethan era, where there was a lot of European political infighting over who was going to get what in North America and South America and Central America.
Yeah.
In the Americas. And so... the Madoc legend was revived, and it was used as like a political tool to argue for English precedence in the New World.
Yeah, right.
And very fascinating. So again, this is where it gets a whole new meaning. And obviously the Spanish, the Portuguese were the first to arrive, and then it was just, a free-for-all. Everyone was just trying to claim whatever.
Yeah.
So... yeah, there was a few different figures. The most interesting was this guy, John Dee. But before him, there was another guy named George Peckham who recorded one of the first sort of anglicized versions of the legend. And this was in 1583.
Okay.
And this was called A True Report of the Late Discoveries of the Newfound Lands. The Newfound Lands. So again, this was a document. It was sort of political propaganda to support the idea of English claims in America.
Okay.
And then, so like I mentioned, this guy John Dee quickly followed in this guy's footsteps. He was a strong political figure in the heydays of this first wave of colonialism. Again, the Queen Elizabeth, she was ruling at this point. And this John Dee, he used the legend in his royal treatise that was called the Title Royal, and he presented it to Queen Elizabeth, and again argued for English precedence in the New World. He claimed that Madoc had founded a colony in the area of Florida.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that makes sense, right? Because in the original legend, it said that 100 men, women, and children formed this colony.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And that kind of reminds me of like Mystery Hill. Imagine if they were responsible for that. But anyways, that's the total side note.
Yeah, and just so people know, Mystery Hill is sort of it's dubbed the American Stonehenge, and it's in New Hampshire.
No one knows who created it. It is made using stonework techniques that are similar to...
They date back... some people argue they date back even to the ancient Minoan civilization.
Okay.
So and some people think that the Minoans could have actually been the Atlanteans. Anyway.
Okay, side note. But anyways, this D guy, he was just using Madoc as a sort of a convenient sort of way to support his arguments. He also claimed that King Arthur had conquered the New World, that this guy Brutus of Troy from Greek mythology had conquered the New World.
I love that. Yeah,
Conquered.
not just gone there, conquered it.
Yeah.
Yet nobody's ever heard of the guy. It was a pretty passive conquering.
Exactly. So I did come across this article talking about Dee, and this is just a quote from this. It was written by a guy named Barone. Anyways, can't remember the name of the article at the top of my head. It says here, quote, Dee himself was a somewhat shadowy figure whose interests moved him from the more practical interests he had in navigation, cartography, and mathematics to a more mystic, esoteric, occultist endeavor in conjuring up spirits. The former studies placed Dee in the vanguard of the scientific revolution. The latter consigned him to the realm of the mystic or Magnus. End quote. So, again, I feel like we would have been friends with this guy because he bleeds into myth, he bleeds into legend, but he likes his facts too, maybe, if they suit his argument.
If they suit it, maybe, yeah.
But a colorful character. He kind of reminds me of someone that might have been an alchemist if he was living in an earlier time. Definitely. But very, very interesting.
It takes people like that to push the boundaries and push the envelope, right?
Exactly.
It's like you can't just accept things.
No.
Just as they are. Like, you gotta potentially search for other solutions, but that is interesting. He definitely would have been a great person to interview on the show.
I know, right?
But the interesting thing about this and like the Madoc and trying to use it as a potential claim for the British and stuff, in Florida, like, what was the route? Is my question, right? Because if we're sort of thinking along the lines that Madoc would have traveled the same sort of route as St. Brendan because they're leaving from a similar location. They're not going straight across the Atlantic. That's a death sentence.
No. Well, he had a fleet of ships.
But I mean, even a fleet, like, you're not just going to go dead across the sea.
I would imagine it would be a very similar trajectory as Brendan.
Right.
Because he would have been inspired by the legends, no doubt. And then from that...
But that's what I'm saying. My point is, like, if he did take the same kind of path, then Florida's a lot further away. Because you're coming up, and then you're traveling all the way down that east coast, all the way to Florida. So it makes more sense that they would have maybe set up establishments in the middle, like, not middle America, but, like, in the midpoint along the east coast, like, maybe somewhere in... even in Canada, right? So anyway.
What were all of these different things? So, okay, but the original thought was that it was Mexico. So that's even further.
Yeah, that's just a different route altogether.
That's just bizarre. You would have had to have gone straight through the Gulf.
Yeah, I mean,
I feel like that's
the thing is with all this is like I don't have any. I believe that it's not the getting there that kind of stumps me the most, right? Like, even if they...
It's like, why would they have stopped further along the way? Or sooner
Why would they have stopped sooner? But even so, even if they tried to take a certain route and got blown off course or something, or storm hits, you end up on a current that you didn't expect, you could make it to a more southerly location or whatever.
Yeah.
The point is that how's that story getting relayed back? Right? Like, when you're that much further away.
Carrier pigeons?
Carrier pigeons? They'd get a little tired.
Okay, wait, yeah, because we don't really get that end of the legend. Did they make it back?
That's the thing with the Madoc legend. We just have these sort of end points and then potential evidence in the New World.
And the Welsh-speaking Native Americans.
Right.
That's weird.
Very strange. Anyway.
So maybe... Well, no, that doesn't make sense, because how would it have such a vast history in Europe, right? And be used by these people like John Dee and all this stuff.
Somebody had to have made it back, right?
Yeah.
But whether it's generations later, we don't know.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you set up an establishment with hundreds of men, women, and children, essentially, maybe it's the next generation that's made it back.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So.
Very cool. I love that.
Me too. It's fascinating stuff.
Oh my gosh, it's so
Now,
amazing.
I do have a few bits of potential proof.
Okay.
So, but this isn't actually related to Madoc. This is kind of going back to Brendan, but just sort of in general, the Irish Celtic, ancient travelers. But basically in the 1980s, after local residents, it wasn't local residents. It was their, Oh, yeah. No, it was. So, 1980s, West Virginia, local residents discover ancient markings and engravings on large boulders near a series of strip mines in a tiny southwest Virginia community known as Dingus.
I'm going to say Dingus.
Dingus? I don't really want to say... Yeah.
I like that. Dingus.
So, yeah. And they were just really strange. They didn't... They're essentially petroglyphs, right? Like, we've talked about those before. So they're, like, etched into the rock.
Okay.
But they looked really weird because they didn't resemble anything remotely similar to the Native Americans in that area. And they're really strange. So archaeologists began to take notice of it and started to research it. And essentially, they, at preliminary glance, was that they were Christian Celtic markings. So...
Okay.
They brought in some researchers. I've got some names here further down. I'll dig it up. Mm-hmm. But essentially, They were, again, a development corporation was the one who actually like pushed forward to have archaeologists take a look at them. They were semi-buried slabs of rock.
That seems kind of ironic. You would think that they would just be like, oh, you know, it's just a couple of rocks. Let's move on and keep building.
I know. Somebody must have been interested in it. Or
I guess,
like they thought that it was kind of unique or something.
Must have had some Celtic heritage.
Yeah. So they were semi-buried, and they showed markings resembling ancient Irish letters known as the Celtic Ogham.
What's that?
It's just basically similar to Old English, I guess, but it's just an Irish alphabet, language, right? Then, later, a few years later, in 1988, representatives from the Irish Embassy in the U.S. actually came to view it. This included the nation's Secretary of Cultural Affairs, and he actually sat down and met with an archaeologist by the name of Robert Pyle to examine these these petroglyphs. The markings appeared to be from around as early as the 8th century to the 12th century AD. So this is after Brendan.
After Brendan.
But around the same time as Madoc.
Yeah. 12th century.
So, right. After the tales of Brendan, but yeah, I mean, it's like, could this have been members of his group that potentially stayed, passed down knowledge and religion? Maybe this is remnants of an oral story of Irish being there. You know what I mean? Somebody wrote it down.
Yeah.
So yeah, anyway, this guy basically, he believes it's the work of early Irish missionaries, this Robert Pyle, and that there's more slabs to be found. And then sure enough, they did. So in neighboring Wyoming, they found another set of rocks with similar markings on them. And they had this, I'm missing the last name. I think it was Barry Letts, I wanted to say the name was.
Barry Letts. Let's go Barry.
He was a biologist by trade, but he was also like a linguistic anthropologist.
Okay.
And he basically translated the inscriptions on this set of rocks as one of them at least saying, quote, "At the time of sunrise, a ray grazes the notch on the left side of Christmas Day, the first season of the year, the season of the blessed advent of our Savior, Lord Christ. Behold, he is born of Mary, a woman."
Okay.
So
very Christian.
Right? So
very...
Yeah, and they concluded that this was not something that was faked or something that had been, right? It was either transported.
So Wyoming, hey?
Yeah.
Wyoming, sorry, where was the first?
West Virginia.
West Virginia.
Now, so...
Is that on the Gulf?
No. So here,
really?
Let me just pull up the map here. So, first of all, the thing that's interesting is, like, West Virginia is landlocked.
Okay.
But it is still relatively close to the ocean. So you've got, like... just like Virginia, Maryland, there. Delaware is kind of very close.
Not Maryland.
There's river systems that would extend in. So
it's not really that far off the coast.
It's not that far off the coast, but when you're looking at the map, I'm thinking to myself, like, okay,
so where's
Madoc
Wyoming?
and Brendan, you're leaving Ireland.
Where's Wyoming?
Up through the UK, you're island hopping north, then west, over towards Iceland, traveling the coast of Iceland, then making a massive, massive jump from Iceland to Greenland, traveling down the coast of Greenland, crossing the Labrador Sea to Newfoundland, then traveling down the east coast of North America to essentially right off the coast of West Virginia, then hiking inward to West Virginia.
Did you see where Wyoming is? It's like in the other side of the country.
Oh, I must have just wrote the wrong thing.
In neighboring Wyoming.
Sorry, neighboring Delaware.
Oh.
Is that right? Is that what I'm trying to say?
Delaware, no.
Let me pull this up here.
Wyoming's right under Montana. It's like on the other side of the country.
I just wrote the wrong thing down here.
Neighboring
Sorry, no. It's just neighboring Virginia. Sorry.
Oh.
It's this just next state over.
Okay.
It's right there.
I'm like, what?
Sorry, I totally wrote that in totally wrong. That's my bad. My mistake.
What? Okay. Well, that clears up a lot of misconceptions.
There we go.
In neighboring Virginia, because Virginia is a coastal state.
Right.
So in that case,
that makes more sense.
It does make a little more sense. And if you look at it, like, honestly, like that, I'm just looking at a North America map right now, and that's not really far off.
It's not that far off.
Because if you think about it, if you were traveling along this coastline, right, and say, yeah, there is quite a big stretch between Greenland and where you would hit Nova Scotia and PEI and all those, like New Brunswick and stuff, but you could potentially have you could have totally missed Newfoundland, hit the Labrador Island and then hit Nova Scotia and then just sort of continue along that coastline.
Yeah, potentially.
And then it was really just a hop, skip, and a jump to Virginia.
Right.
At that point. And, like, really, yeah, like, it's funny, like, looking at it from a bird's eye angle, you're like, oh, there's a massive chunk of land right there, but if your perspective is so limited when you're on the actual surface of the ocean that you would not be able to see that, potentially. No. So it would make sense that you just kind of, oh, man. Could you just imagine, like, yeah, you're just the tip of the iceberg, and you just, like, just miss it. But you don't really, because you land in Virginia.
Yeah.
But very cool.
Bizarre. It really is bizarre, though.
I feel like I need to brush up on my American, yeah, just like the states of America and all that. Like, being up here in Canada, we've only got 13 provinces and territories here. Yeah.
Yeah, you got a lot more going on down in the U.S. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. We're kind of at the end here, but those were the two really interesting legends.
The two ones we wanted to focus on. There was definitely ones that we saw. Like, obviously, it's the most obvious would have been the Norse. But we didn't want to just go with the most obvious. There were other ones like the ancient Minoans and things that you kind of touched on a little bit in your research, Andrew. But we didn't want to get too down the rabbit hole. We want to keep it succinct. And if anyone has any information on additional cultures and histories that could have potentially traveled, and there's legends of this North American journey or whatever
you want to hear, like,
well, yeah, exactly, that you've heard of, that you would love to share with us, like, because like we said, we're open to doing a bonus ep.
Definitely.
We love this kind of stuff, like diving into the fringe history.
Totally.
Alt history. But,
I can't believe I wrote down frickin' Wyoming. How did that even happen?
That threw me off so bad. I was like,
how did that even happen?
I don't even know.
Classic Andrew move.
So out of Brendan and Maddock, what do you think is most plausible?
Personally, I feel like I'm leaning towards the story of St. Brendan.
Really?
Because
the one boat guy.
The one boat guy.
The one boat ancient
just
guy.
Just because I think that the route he took was more plausible, and Tim Severin proved that. True. Right?
But if Maddock was taking the same route and he had a fleet of ships, he could have potentially found.
And it was a lot more recent. Well, it's still really old, but obviously, another 600 plus years after St. Brendan. So newer technologies, slightly, right? Yeah. And obviously, crew. I don't know. What do you think?
I'm really on the fence, because if Maddock had established a colony like that legend said, it easily could have been wiped out, similar to like Roanoke or whatever, like where it's just, say they have bad crops one year, say a disease comes flying through and they're just not, like, they're susceptible because they don't have immunity. Mm-hmm. All that kind of stuff can quickly wipe out any remnants of a civilization, especially one that is very I'm not going to say primitive, but just like more like temporary, like a colony type of thing, right, where it's not like they're building stone castles or something like that. Yeah. And what if Mystery Hill could potentially be connected to either one of these, right?
Totally.
But again, that would be something I would love to follow up on for like a bonus ep. Definitely. And get into the more the physical evidence side, because it is very few and far between, but I'm sure we could dig up some more if we looked around.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, I guess the thing is like, yeah, obviously, like, as like archaeologists or whoever, I mean, they need you want physical evidence, you need physical evidence, but the thing is like, if you're talking about very small groups of people coming over, and even if it's in the neighborhood of 150, 200 people,
that's small.
It's tiny. And even if they did get an establishment set up and even had one or two generations of people like born and raised, right, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to still be around, right? Like, what if there's a war or something, right? Like with indigenous population or whatever, things get wiped out, right? Exactly. It's the same idea of like what happened with the Roanoke colony.
Well,
right. There's nothing left except for the Dare Stone and and a couple other little coins and things like that. Well, it's like we find those types of things, but it's not enough physical evidence to say, hey, St. Brendan actually did make it over.
Exactly. It's not like he wrote his name on the coins. And
right. And it's like, it's just the classic
Brendan
thing.
Was here.
Yeah, it's the classic thing. It's like where we need evidence, but it's like absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, right? And the fact that almost all Native American tradition is oral tradition doesn't help either, because they're not writing it down. They're not saying, hey, look who showed up.
And to think about, like, that was 1,500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. Even if something like this was sort of passed down through oral whatever, there's a lot of fragmentary subcultures and populations and stuff, like and then obviously in the wake of colonialism, a lot of those sort of subsects could have just been wiped out. And
Yeah,
then
exactly.
the stories get wiped out with them, and then there's nothing left.
I am of
That's
the
kinda
mind
scary.
that the ancient Chinese and the ancient Welsh and Irish.
I think it's possible that all of them could have made it.
Absolutely.
And not even known that the other had been there, because it's just such a big
How
place.
would they know?
Exactly.
How would you know? Like,
That would be amazing, right? If you actually landed on the same shores as another culture.
at like the same time. Could you imagine? Just like show up, it's like, that ship looks weird. And then it's just like, it's Zheng He coming in, and then it's like Maddox coming in, and it's like, what are you guys doing here? Like,
I love it.
wait a second.
I feel like that's like a Far Side comic.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Well, I think that wraps it up pretty much. We'd love to hear what you guys have to say about all of this, as usual. We love to get emails, feedback. You can always reach out on intotheportalmailbox@gmail.com.
Yeah.
On our socials, obviously. Like, you can DM us, you can just comment, you can whatever. Get on our group, on our forum, our
Yeah,
Facebook forum
Totally.
group.
Come chat with us on Facebook. You can send us messages on Instagram or Twitter.
Yeah.
We love talking with people about different theories and what they like to listen to and stuff like that. So like with this one, this was actually like a listener inspired sort of mini series we wanted to do on this. So yeah, if you guys, like Amber said earlier, if you have any historical stories along the same lines that you really want
Any
to hear,
legends you've heard in the past.
totally.
We
We
would-
will
yeah.
try to incorporate that into a bonus episode or something. So
Get at us.
yeah.
Get at us, please.
And once again, don't forget to rate and review the show. We really appreciate it. It really helps out a ton. And we haven't mentioned this for a little while, but we do have our Patreon up and running.
yeah.
So it's patreon.com/into the portal. And it's been sweet. We've had some people join on, and
it's
we've
been
got
really
our
cool.
first bonus episode is up there.
Yep.
And so you guys can go check it out. And we'd love to get feedback on that as well. So once again, thank you so much for joining us on Into the Portal.
Yeah, until next week.
This was a podcast from the Podfix Network. You can check out more shows like it at podfixnetwork.com.